Okay, welcome to the September Rust CTCFT. Today, we got a different kind of agenda. In prior meetings, we've done a lot of kind of more prepared slides, but this time I was talking with Forrest and we thought we wanted to do something to do with interest groups, and we thought we might do something a little more interactive, a little more of a roundtable discussion with various people who've been involved in running interest groups and with the folks who are here from the Rust teams to talk about kind of how interest groups and the Rust org and stuff can interact. But before we get to that, I wanted to give a little time for announcements. If anyone has anything they want to say, now's a good time. I guess I'll kick off and say you've probably seen it, but I've been working on this thing we call the Rust Station Principles, and I'm really eager to talk to people about them who have thoughts about them. So let me know if you do, and we can discuss. You'll find them at, well, you'll find them on my blog. I don't know what the URL is. ruststation-principles. something or other, Netlify or something. Anyone else have announcements they'd like to make? Tony, how involved are you in the formal methods? Or Ernest, maybe? Would you like to speak about that real fast?
I'm mostly a like interested user, but at the same time, I come more from like the practitioner side, and I feel like formal methods is very much like an academic discipline. I'm very excited about people who are trying to like build that bridge between the two of them. So, yeah.
Hey everyone, hi. Sorry, I have to whisper a bit because it's 2 a.m. here in London. And yeah, I really wanted to make this panel. So my involvement in the Rust formal interest group and the Rust cryptography interest group is they are sister interest groups, kind of like running in parallel. And we're just exploring the synergies between the two. And I'm helping, I co-lead the Rust cryptography interest group with Tony. So, hey, Tony. And I'm helping support the Rust formal interest group, the Rust formal methods interest group kind of exist, just facilitating and being like a supporting partner for the Rust formal methods interest group. And we had the inaugural call today, well, earlier today in like European time, and it was like the first ever meeting, and it went really well. You were there, Nico. There were a bunch of other people there. It's being led by Xavier Dennis and Bas Spitters, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I thought it might be nice for people to know we launched a new interest group today, even as we're talking about them. All right, any last announcements people want to make? Otherwise, I have another brief one. Okay, so I just wanted to say one thing is, this is the third CTFC or fourth, I don't know. Anyway, we've had a number of these meetings, and they started out as a kind of experiment for like just doing something a little different than we had been doing and trying to bring together the community in a different way than just interest boards and so on. Trying to figure out if we could get people to have some synchronous discussion while not, a lot of times when we try to do that, we end up leaving people out. So trying to make different structures that include different time zones, include more people. If we could have new ways to share experiences and ideas, if we could give it ridiculous names and have people still show up. I know you all love it. And so it seems like it's working. It seems like it's created a kind of new venue for the community. So what I want to do, Forrest and I have been talking about, is trying to create a group along with some others around it to help it get organized, right? And And so if that's something you'd be interested in, then you should contact Forrest on Discord or Zulip, and we can talk about it, what that is, how that's going to work going forward. But so apart from that, I'm going to hand it off now. Oops, that's the minutes. Where's the slides? What happened to all my links? I don't know. They're here somewhere. There we go. I'm going to hand it off for the roundtable, and we'll see where it goes.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Nico. And so Nico reached out to me about this a while ago, and I've been super excited to be able to sit down and chat with these other working in interest group leaders and sort of be able to address a lot of the core Rust teams on a lot of potentially problems in our working groups, or areas where there could be improvement, or just kind of give some information about how we might be doing things. And so I want to be able to highlight some of the areas that we're doing with maybe community growth, maybe with, as I mentioned, like problems in our working groups. But I do want to focus on items that are more core to things that would matter to people who know Rust already. And so it's not really like a high level presentation about what our working groups are. We'll give like a little bit of an overview, but I definitely want to dive a lot deeper than you would normally see in maybe a talk or something like that. And so the goal of these sort of like discussions now will be to inform different teams about what kind of stuff each one is working on, but then also promote this sort of communication and collaboration between teams that aren't really part of like the inner sanctum of like the core or the Lang teams or anything like that. And so as I've been talking with several of these other team leaders over the past week or so, I've definitely been pretty interested to see that a lot of my problems aren't necessarily the same as what they're finding. And so we're gonna have an opportunity to compare and contrast a lot of our different ideas and opinions, and hopefully be able to bring some valuable information to the people who can make very structural changes to the language. And so when it comes to the format of this roundtable, I'm trying to think of it sort of like a podcast episode in a little bit of a way, where we'll have several questions that we'll come in with, and hopefully this will give us enough to discuss, and we've kind of like structured it in a way that we think this is like the most valuable stuff we want to go over. But the audience that is here is very involved with a lot of different things all across the Rust language. So I think it's very important that if the audience has particular questions that might pertain to their specific working groups, then it would be a really great idea to involve some of these questions in like the discussions. And so feel free to just put it in the chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that throughout the panel, and hopefully we can get some interesting discussions going on. So for the presenters, we have 4 different people from 4 different working groups.
Can I just interrupt 1 second to say, I forgot to say this, but a lot of times it's nice if you're going to speak to come on video. So I would also recommend that if you have a question you want to ask or something like that, though you don't have to.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that would be good. Yes, I suppose I'll keep an eye on chat, and then I'll call people up if they want to ask a particular question, or if you just want to put it in chat, I can also keep an eye on that. And so for the separate presenters that we have today, Nico, if you could just go to the next slide here. So we have 4 different working group leaders across 4 different working groups. So we have game development, embedded, cryptography, and machine learning. And so we're just going to go through some introductions right now. So for myself, my name is Forrest, or my handle, Angel on Fire. I do a lot of work in the Rust game development sort of ecosystem. And so I started out by working on a project called Valoran several years ago, and I focused a lot on writing the blog for that and doing a lot of just different outreach. But from there, I've expanded into working on the Rust Game Dev podcast. And so we've had several episodes come out so far, and we've had the opportunity to speak with some really awesome people. Every month, I help edit the Rust Game Dev newsletter. And so this is an opportunity to sort of gather what the community has been working on over the past month and categorize it into some sections that you can digest pretty nicely. And then I also run a monthly meetup on the 2nd Saturday of each month. And so this is just another opportunity for people to kind of have a platform to show off what they've been working on. And so next up, I'll pass it over to Adam Grieg, who is part of the embedded working group.
Hi, everyone. So thanks, Forrest. as I said, I'm Adam. I help run the embedded working group, and I also run the STM32 project, which is a sort of embedded project specifically for one type of embedded device. I've been doing the embedded stuff in Rust for maybe 3 years now or so, so I've been sort of seeing it develop as it goes. The embedded working group is really focusing on trying to get as much support as possible for using Rust on embedded devices. And that's down from very small microcontrollers across a range of different architectures up to embedded Linux, so running on a Raspberry Pi or similar embedded computer. Most of the work we do these days is in maintaining a sort of set of core crates. So we have some crates that are used across the board for specific architectures, and we have some crates where we have some sort of abstractions and traits that lots of different people implement in different ways, and it's useful to have a sort of central location to collaborate on. We also help coordinate between lots of other projects that are somewhat related. So for example, there's the STM32 project I run, and there's a similar project for different manufacturers, embedded devices and architectures. And we provide a sort of central place for people to collaborate and talk to each other and coordinate, trying to make things fit together. And in principle, we also help coordinate the needs of embedded users with the Rust-Lang core team. And I feel like in the last year, we've not really done a great job of that. So that's maybe something we'd like to try and improve on. And I guess finally, I should say, we also maintain a set of documentation, books, and the like for people new to embedded and people new to Rust who want to get involved in doing embedded on Rust. Cool, and that's it, thank you.
Perfect, thank you, Adam. So next up is Tony Archieri. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, which is who is part of the cryptography working group.
Yeah, so it's actually our Siri. It's impossible to pronounce. The Italians Archieri or something like that. But I work on a few different things throughout the Rust ecosystem. I'm one of the co-founders of the Rust Cryptography Interest Group, along with Ernest. Also work on a project called Rust Crypto, not the ancient crate that hasn't been updated in like 6 years, but the GitHub organization of the same name. I know it's kind of confusing. So at least I would say with it, well, I should also say I also work on RustSec, which is a vulnerability advisory database for Rust, and everybody should run cargo audit on their projects. So within kind of the purview of Rust Crypto, I mainly work on the really boring stuff that everybody uses. So it's kind of like the nuts and bolts of things like symmetric cryptography, elliptic curves, that kind of thing. So like the AES crate, the AES GCM crate, if you've ever used either of those, the digest crate, the SHA-2 crate, things like that. So just kind of these like standard algorithms that everybody has to use because they're used everywhere. That's the kind of stuff we work on. So the Rust Cryptography Interest Group, there's just so much cool Rust cryptography stuff happening in the ecosystem, and we felt it was all kind of like happening in silos. People weren't really talking and sharing, finding ways to collaborate and that kind of thing. So I think really that was the impetus of the working group to kind of like solve some cross-functional problems in the Rust cryptography ecosystem, and maybe just a little bit of trying to brainstorm how we could improve the language for cryptography.
Perfect, thank you, Tony. And so next up we have Ricky Hosfeld, who is part of the machine learning interest group.
Hi everyone, I'm Ricky. I basically saw the need for a machine learning interest group just because I was working in the time at a university research center that everyone knew I liked Rust, and it was basically just writing a bunch of models for some professors. And everybody asked me, well, why aren't you using Rust for it? And I was like, good question, let me go look. And that was because the ecosystem was pretty fractured at the time and there was hardly anybody in it. So I figured let's try to stand one up and see what happens and see the people we get. So that's pretty much the start of it. And it's kind of gone pretty well since then. We've had some great people standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say, and we've paved the way with Luca and everyone doing the Linfa crate. So the machine learning interest group has taken over that, as well as basically, like some of the other groups mentioned, writing the book on kind of how to use Rust for machine learning. We also maintain arewelearningyet.com. The answer is still no, but we are gathering crates and we are working towards finding the areas of machine learning that we need to actually kind of lay the groundwork in order to make sure that people can use machine learning in Rust. I believe that's all I got for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ricky. So I first want to dive in and talk a little bit about our communities and maybe how maybe we view them as part of where we all meet and sort of are able to talk together, or where instead people can go and discuss different issues that need to be worked on. And so sort of just like to start this out, I want to like propose a question like, what does that look like for your working group? And so in game development in particular, we focus a lot on different Discord servers. And so especially because a lot of game development happens within the game engines, or at least the development of them, then there will be a lot of different communities that are focused on, for example, the Bevy engine or the Amethyst engine. And so they will each have their own communities, and then a lot of smaller communities will arise from different maybe crates or maybe games that are being worked on. And so, for example, with Valoran, we have a quite a large Discord server as well. But then we also have a central hub, which is a Discord a GitHub organization, where we are able to sort of discuss a lot of the overarching issues that we have, or that we want to work towards improving, as in maybe we need some like lower level graphic stuff to be able to target different platforms, or just general stuff in the ecosystem that needs to be worked on. So for us, it's mostly a lot of game development. It's a lot of GitHub and Discord. And then I'll just go in reverse order here. So Ricky, can you tell us a little bit about the machine learning community?
Sure. So we organize mainly on Zulip. We picked that just because it seemed like the least resistance path. It worked out pretty well. We can have, several channels. I can sub people to basically, a certain group of channels when they first join, and just kind of let any number of people kind of create channels or restrict that. So it worked out pretty well when I was looking at the differences between different mediums. Usually once every other week, we'd meet up on Zoom around 2 o'clock Eastern time. That seemed to work pretty well because a lot of us are span the coast of the US and are in Western Europe. So it did seem to work out pretty well. I think we started at 5 o'clock, and then I kind of held a democratic vote in the Zulip channel. We only got about 10 responses, but that was overwhelmingly around early afternoon US time, seemed to work for us. The Zulip channel is basically a place to either meet and talk and kind of ask questions and introduce yourself, as well as that's where we coordinate the meetings. We post the meetings in a specific meeting channel that everyone's involved in. And we just kind of either kind of throw ideas at each other. One of the biggest things is because we're spread across such a time zone that kind of like either I'm in bed and everyone's awake, or the opposite. We will post crates that we find on crates.io or a certain article, and just kind of looks at, hey, do we know about this? Is this on arewelearningyet.com? Is it worth putting on there? Does it only have one download that just exists overnight? Do we think it's going to be useful? Stuff like that. So, and it works out pretty well to kind of chat asynchronous like this. That way we can get that kind of work done before we actually meet for only an hour out of the day and everything. So, is there anything else that I can add to that I may have skimmed over?
Well, I think one thing that I find interesting sort of about the way that you're describing communicating with the community is that a lot of it is sort of to gain knowledge together. And so with the end goal of moving stuff to Are We Learning Yet? And so would you say that like Are We Learning Yet is really the best way for newcomers to be able to get into the working group maybe?
I would say that's a good way to capture what the environment looks like in Rust now for machine learning people. They'll see a lot of things that they recognize, all the terms they like to look for, and as well as like a very nice gridded pattern on, does it exist in Rust yet? And if it does, if it's not on the website, if it's not there, there's a blank box, they know that, oh, okay, maybe it's not there. Organization wise, Zulip's probably the best way, as long as we also have a GitHub group as well.
Yeah, and I think I really like your point about sort of finding times for the weekly meetings, because I think depending on the size, like with game development, a while ago we did have these sort of weekly meetings, but they've sort of like tapered on and off, and then fragmented into different periodic meetings. Maybe like the Russian community will, I think they have their own type of meetup and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting that with like the smaller interest group, it's you're able to sort of find a time and dive in on that. Yeah. All right. So Tony, a little bit about maybe the cryptography community.
So yeah, I mean, there's two ways you can approach this, right? There's our interest group, the Rust cryptography interest group, which is kind of fairly new. So we've been doing synchronous meetings on kind of like a monthly cadence for about the past 5 months. So I think that's kind of new in terms of these groups. Just in terms of the wider Rust community, I think Rust was kind of this crazy sleeper language that came in and like dominated the entire cryptography space, and people weren't really getting together and talking about that specifically. But just personally for me, I go to like a lot of cryptography conferences and conferences on things like zero knowledge proofs and that kind of thing. I would say over the course of the past 5 years or so, there's been this whole cohort of people doing crazy things with cryptography. I think wouldn't be possible without a language like Rust, right? But cryptography people, maybe they go and kind of do things in silos and they do this really cool work, but they don't necessarily like get together and talk about advancing the general cause of Rust cryptography so much as like cryptography is a field. So yeah, Arias, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I can jump in on that, and it's a really interesting part of the Rust ecosystem, and looking from the outside in, it felt like, again, there was a level of fragmentation, and people working in silos. So, coming in and kind of being the cavalry to kind of get people talking, get people cross-pollinating and helping each other. That's really the mandate that we set for ourselves when me and Tony got together to form this interest group. It was about kind of like making sure that there was an apex point that we're all working towards, where people come in and leave their agendas at the door, and we work towards really kind of forming out this important part of the Rust ecosystem, which was a bit Swiss cheese, if that makes sense. And that's where the sync up calls come in. We style our monthly calls as sync up calls, where we're looking at blue sky thinking for the ecosystem, first of all, where cryptography is concerned, and things like, what do we want to see in cryptography? What do we want to see done? And how can we all work together to make that happen? So we have a lot of kind of like mandates and to-dos and a lot of things that kind of lead us towards a point where we look at other interest groups and other working groups to kind of aspire to be like them and be like, hey, you know what? The embedded group are really great at governance. Like, we need an awesome Rust cryptography website as well, where we can showcase all of the different crates that are being used for cryptography, because we don't have that yet. So what does that look like? How can we all work towards that, regardless of our own specific agendas? And that's where, the power of an interest group really comes into play, where we really able to get people into the same room to kind of move towards an apex point to get things done. Also having Nico come in as a special guest to help us, give us ideas around vision documents and things like that. What does a vision document for the cryptography space look like? And so on, so it's a really exciting time, and it's a really fun thing to be involved in. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add in as a point to what Tony was saying as well. I hope that makes sense.
I think it's very interesting to hear about the agility that sort of comes with an interest group, in sort of since it's like a little bit newer and you're able to put a lot of work in to start it yourself, then you really have the ability to make these changes that you want to see, because you want to like push the agenda of getting your sort of, well, yeah, your interests as part of something that can be used in Rust. And so I think maybe an interesting distinction where when it comes to the game development working group is that since it's so large and in a way more democratic in a way, sort of, I think, or sorry, not that it's less democratic for a smaller one, but rather when there's so many separate parties coming into a working group that are, for example, creating game engines or doing graphics or doing something completely different, working on color theory and stuff like that. I think then there is the common interest, but it is definitely more difficult to move in a large forward direction, I think. So yeah, it's kind of cool to hear what the pivot of the interest group looks like. All right, and then Adam, if you want to tell us a little bit about the community for embedded.
Sure, yeah. It's interesting to hear you saying just now about the slightly larger game dev group having some sort of maybe less agility or maybe harder to bring everyone together. I feel like we have a very similar thing in embedded where it's a reasonably large group. There's maybe 40 members apparently. I don't know, really depends how you count it, I guess. And a lot of people doing various embedded things. But there's it feels like there's much less agility and much less ability to quickly move around and change things, just because I guess you're right, again, it's a sort of democracy is not really the word, but a lot of different people pulling in different directions. So in the embedded working group, to round out the sort of collection of chat systems, we use Matrix really almost exclusively. All the different communities run Matrix, where we have one main embedded room, and I guess it's a bit like an IRC channel or something, right? Where we come in, people chat all the time. We have a weekly meeting at 8 p.m. Berlin time for some historic reason every week since the start of 2018, I think. But it's still all in chat. So while it's synchronous, we don't really have video or voice calls. It's pretty much just anyone who wants to drop by can chat. At first, it was a more structured meeting where we'd be very much deliberately setting out. At one point, we were writing a book, and the meeting each week was, okay, we're going to get these chapters done on this book. Who can do this chapter? Who can do this chapter? These days, it tends to be a bit more open-ended. So something will come up for some issue on a crate somewhere where we need some discussion, or something's been nominated for discussion this week. So we have a label across all of our GitHub repos to nominate specific issues for discussion. Or just, you know, there's nothing in particular we need to talk about that week. So a few people turn up and we just chat about whatever's interesting on embedded. And that seems to work out reasonably well for us now. It does seem like as the scope has gotten bigger, as the number of people doing embedded on Rust has gotten bigger, in some ways the specific responsibilities of the working group have got smaller, in that we're maintaining our crates, but a lot of concerns now are backwards compatibility and stability of these things that more external users have come to rely on. And we're feeling perhaps less pressure to go out and solve specific problems, more trying to coordinate people and keep things slowly ticking. What else was I trying to say? Yeah, I guess that's the gist of how our community organizes. Of course, we have a GitHub organization and we have a lot of teams inside that maintaining different sets of crates. But I guess that's pretty similar for everyone. Yeah, at various points we tried to do, so it was, yeah, one other thing, I guess, to push the development forward was have sort of teams create wish lists and goals for each year. So at the start of the year, we'd have a bigger meeting and say, okay, actually, what do these teams want to accomplish looking forward? You know, what are the important things we want to try and get done? Or what have other embedded users come to us and say, we're really missing this? You know, someone says, I'd love to have a real-time operating system in Rust. We say, well, can we write one for you? So if you are, maybe not. But in the last couple of years, that's also slowed down a bit. It seems like a lot of the novel development effort is now happening outside of a working group. Sometimes with working group members, sometimes people who don't happen to be in the working group, but they're pushing forward the embedded stuff they're looking at in a separate space, and they just come to the working group to chat and coordinate with everybody else. And that seems to be, I don't know, there's a lot of projects flourishing, which we don't have to directly write ourselves, right? We just help people coordinate.
Yeah, a lot of really great points there. And I just want to cover Adam and my back by saying that we're not trying to say that our groups are not agile or that there's like too much overhead. And rather, I think that when people come up with new initiatives and want to, for example, run these types of weekly meetups or get something going, it's very possible to do that. But I'm just sort of inspired by Ernest sort of talking about the ability to do stuff yeah, just so freely with the beginning of the cryptography group. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. Yeah, okay, perfect. And so next up, I want to dive into the problems that our working group sort of experienced. And so this was an interesting one, just because I think what I assume the problems within game development are, I sort of just assume that that's very broad across all of Rust. But when I was sort of telling Nico that one of our largest problems was compile time, Nico was a little bit more surprised by that. And so I think that we've seen this a lot more in modern, or rather like the more recent game engines in Rust, is that they'll focus very heavily on compile time. And so, for example, with Bevy, it has a specific set of instructions in the tutorial that will teach you how to, or not really teach you, but show you some ways to get faster compile times. And then Bevy also uses some techniques to reduce compile times because of how the engine is built. And so within a lot of within a lot of game development, iteration time is incredibly important. And so this is either solved by being able to do more while you are in game, or if you need to reboot the game many times, making sure that compile time is low. And so a potential solution is like the idea of hot reloading. And so you can keep the game running, but you can be changing design values, which will affect maybe some part of the game, maybe more enemies, or something looks a little bit different. But then as your game gets a lot larger, you are going to have to start caring a lot more about the fact that it's going to take half a minute to compile or anything like that. So I kind of just want to pass this around and have this open for any of the other leads that kind of want to hop in on maybe discussing some of the issues that they find relative to their particular working or interest groups. Or if not, I'll pick on some of them. Or Tony. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I can hop on here. I mean, so I'll preface this by saying we created an interest group instead of a working group because we think Rust is already such a great language for cryptography. Like, you don't need to make specific language changes, and there are a handful of ones we think would be helpful, but they're such like crazy monster problems that we don't really expect them to get solved anytime soon. And yeah, at the same time, the more I like explore any one of these given problems, it's just I should also say we're gonna have a call this Friday to talk about some of them. They're really like very specific things for cryptography. I've been trying to boil it down to like, what is the minimum viable primitive for having constant time code in Rust? What would that look like? What does that need to touch? It touches everything. It touches like code gen, it touches LLVM. I'm talking to LLVM experts. I'm like, how do we get these guarantees out of LLVM? And it's like, we need this really crazy monster change to LLVM that probably isn't going to happen. So otherwise, I would say like, Rust as it is fantastic for cryptography, even if we can't get like guaranteed solutions to these specific kind of like monster problems are just really hard to solve in any language. But that would be one of them. How do we get this on Intel CPUs? It's called cmove. It would be this one instruction to do branching in constant time effectively. Just turns out to be very, very tricky, and yeah, we'll see if it ever gets solved in any language. I don't know.
Happy to jump in with some embedded stuff if you like, Forrest. So I don't know, we have totally different problems. I guess the compile time is almost never an issue. Our crates tend to be a lot smaller, I suppose. And I mean, usually running on a device with some hundreds of kilobytes of RAM and flash, you just can't write that much code. The executable wouldn't fit. But instead, I don't know, I think we have the biggest Rust-related problems we have are that we keep hitting stupid corner cases in memory models, especially. we'll discover that the sort of fundamental abstraction that we used across the whole embedded ecosystem is unsound, and we need to rewrite everything. That's happened twice now, I guess. And it's like, oh, whoops, it turns out LLVM can just insert a read to this volatile memory whenever it wants. That's bad. Or, oh, we need to initialize memory at startup. We don't have a loader. But we do so by just writing to a bunch of memory, and in the process create aliasing mutables. And now it's unsound, and we need to swap that entire chunk of crate to assembly or whatever. So we keep hitting these sort of tricky memory problems, and I guess especially they're tricky because they require so much domain expertise that it's hard to find anyone to talk to even to work out whether what we're doing is still sound. And then the other half of the problem we have is that there's a lot of different types of embedded users. We have a lot of people coming to the working group who are in the, I guess, hobbyists, essentially, who don't have very much embedded experience. They're not professionals doing this for their job, but they're people who really want to use Rust in their hobbyist projects and need something that's relatively quick to get going and they can understand, what's going on. And we also have users coming from companies who are saying, well, I want to use Rust in my safety critical thing. I need it to be certified 10 different ways. I need to get every last bit of performance out of this really niche architecture I'm using. And helping both of those people share the same crates and resources and stuff has been more challenging, I guess. Trying to work out what abstraction levels work for different people has been one of the big issues. Yeah, and I guess the other big problem we have is just there's a million types of embedded hardware. So in some sense, it's a big problem. You develop some support for one chip, and you're like, well, that's great, but this manufacturer has 200 chips in this family alone, and you've supported one of them. And there's also 50 manufacturers, and it becomes a hopeless endeavor. So really finding a structure that lets you build support for lots and lots and lots of different hardware architectures has been one of the big challenges as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear. I never really thought much about memory layouts on hardware, and so I think that's a very cool kind of very domain specific thing to hear about. Ricky, I want to open up to you if you like to maybe chat about some of the potential issues in machine learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so far we found that overall Rust is a great language for it. We've added a couple things to the compiler. We've done the be able to build and enable LLVM plugins, which is really great because we're able to then kind of allow enzyme in some of our builds, which is the automatic differentiation tool that was created at MIT. And that's been helpful to some of the stuff that we've been able to look at. Once LLVM writes our code, we can do a little bit faster things with that and on the machine learning level. Really, it's been a little bit more about how do we organize the group into people who know machine learning and people who know Rust and get them to kind of talk to each other on ways that they both understand each other. And really the group's been mainly about that so far. So we haven't hit too many Rust issues, but especially compile time wise, I think people who use and do machine learning for a living are kind of used to training models. So compile times really aren't that bad for them as opposed to waiting several days for a GPU to crank on a problem, right? At least so far, we haven't seen anything like that yet. And we're starting to get our footing in the door on those kind of things. But first, we really need to kind of lay the groundwork for people to be able to use it. And I'd say our biggest problem so far is just kind of figuring out where the holes are for people to actually get started. And that's why we're writing the book first, is that we want to make sure that there are some examples on how to do some of the basic things that people like to do and some of the toy projects that are the hello world of the machine learning community.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's very cool to hear about these separate sides.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry.
Of course, absolutely.
I'm a little bit too late. This is something I think actually a bunch of people might want, and that would be a first-class way to ensure code is panic-free. And as part of this formal methods working group, interest group, we saw a presentation today on a tool that can do this called Prosty. It looks very cool. There's probably a dozen crates that do this in different capacities. Look at it on the unit of an entire crate or on individual functions. But I think ideally, I'd personally like to see some first-class functionality in the Rust compiler to say, this entire crate is panic free when compiled is a release build, or with these certain feature sets are panic free, like that kind of thing, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have heard about the formal interest or working group today. Just because, yeah, there's so much. Actually, Nico, if you want to add something here.
Not directly on panic freedom. I have a question though about
Okay.
problems.
Yeah.
I heard a number of you mentioned like, well, for example, in the machine learning interest group, kind of collecting projects for Are We Learning Yet? I'm wondering whether you've had problems or challenges trying to give people a kind of coherent getting started experience. Like, is it just a matter of cataloging all the things, but then that presents probably a lot of choices and maybe some things work well together and some things don't? Have you thought about this problem of like having someone come in and get started easily with a collection of crates that work well together or something like that, and how to manage that?
Ricky.
Yeah, we've definitely tried. And the problem is that machine learning, it evolves fast too. There's always a new paper out that everyone wants to try. And that's really the hard part, is that everyone wants to build that new paper that came out. So everyone wants the newest and latest things. So it's really hard as a group who's trying to just set up the basics, be on that forefront as well. And that's at least what we've run into, is that no one's really excited about building the basics to get everything working. Everyone's excited to come in, and I just read about this paper. If you guys heard about this, we're like, yeah, it's not going to really work for us right now, though. And that's when they kind of lose their interest in like staying with the group and helping make that possible. So that's kind of what I've seen definitely in the past couple months that we've existed.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that, not from the perspective of machine learning, but a little bit from what I would view as the getting started for game development. I would sort of put it into a few different boats, where maybe you see that there's this cool new engine in Rust, and it's talking about how everything is data driven and entity component systems and all of this magic that makes it significantly better than other games. I think that's a really great way to drive people to be excited about these types of ideas, or to just offer this boon of things that you couldn't have before. And so this is what drives a lot of people to try out a lot of the really cool engines. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of projects out there already that sort of bring people into a very small section of game development. And so one of the big ones that is currently being developed is, I forget the exact name, but it's a roguelike toolkit. And this gives you the ability to sort of walk through a large tutorial on how to develop in Rust, with the larger goal of being able to create a roguelike game at the end. And the crate that it uses is specifically built for creating roguelikes in a terminal. And so this gives people like an avenue to sort of follow to be able to complete, or at least get used to learning. And so I do wonder what that might translate over to when it comes to machine learning, and like what are those like. You get to see this really cool thing and then follow like a few steps, whether it be from a community blog where someone's like, oh, this is what I was able to create with this crate. Or on the other hand, if it's the interest group itself writing these tutorials and sort of trying to, or as the interest group, you know what can be interesting and what can be fun. And so you're encouraging this in others. And so, yeah, I do wonder what it could look like for machine learning. But that was more of a comment than anything. I don't necessarily need an answer.
I'd say for cryptography, like it's something we're trying to feel out and solve. Like I know it's definitely been a big issue, like going to meetups and stuff. I've heard people be like, what do I use for Rust cryptography? Like, and there's not really a good resource. So we put together this like cryptography rs.rs like giant list of crates. I'm not sure that's really helpful for anybody, especially like kind of an app developer who has like a tenuous grasp of cryptography in general. Like, which crate do I pick? Which I use? like that kind of thing. I think Ring has been like fairly popular is like probably the right answer. But like other than that, like, you know, I think it's generally an unsolved problem, although one we're interested in solving. I would be curious like how other working groups kind of put together this, like, you know, you're new to Rust, you're working in this field, like how do you get started kind of guide thing.
Adam, I'd be interested in hearing sort of from the perspective of embedded, because I've had several times where I've been like, I really want to try Rust for embedded, and I go to the website and I see like some hardware that I need to pick up. But what do you think the onboarding looks like for, or like, what are the onboarding goals for new developers?
Yeah, we a long time ago wrote this book called The Discovery Book, or actually Japarek, who was one of the founders of the working group back in 2017, maybe wrote it, and it's been maintained since, where we basically say, look, there's a million bits of hardware you could have, and we really can't help you with all of it as a beginner. But if you buy this one board, which you can pick up for $10 from, you know, most countries, there are websites where you can buy it. And we then have this basically a long tutorial that introduces a lot of embedded concepts. So it doesn't assume you have any embedded experience, and introduces all the Rust concepts as well. And the sort of the goal there is you can start from basically very little existing knowledge, buy this one piece of hardware that we say, please just buy this one thing and know it will work. And then you work your way through all the different features of this board, slowly developing more and more firmware for it. And it seems to work well, or at least it's a really popular book. The problem we have now is that it's getting kind of old, and that obviously in the years gone by, people have invented a lot of clever new ways of doing things. There've been new crates, even the supporting stuff. When the book was written, the only way to load your code was using this more legacy project, OpenOCD, which is tricky to use, and also the config files. They didn't have a release for 3 years, so people were using 3-year-old versions of the software. And these days we have loads of really lovely solutions and tooling in Rust, but none of that's mentioned in this discovery book yet, because no one's gone through all of these chapters to update all the instructions to say, actually, use these new tools, use this new library. So on the one hand, it's been a really popular onboarding thing, and I think a lot of people have followed it through. Certainly, a lot of people have opened issues saying, oh, I found this typo, or this one command hasn't worked, whatever. But on the other hand, I don't know what happens when you get to the end of that and we say, great, you're up to date with embedded Rust 3 years ago. What next is maybe a more challenging problem still for us to solve. And I guess as with the other groups, everything is evolving over time. People are still coming up with new ideas. You know, we're now getting more and more async stuff in embedded Rust, which is exciting, but we have basically no tutorials about that whatsoever. I suspect the solution is going to be more updates to these books. Right now, there's an effort to really update this discovery book using the new hardware, which is now more available and easier to get, and using more modern Rust tooling and everything else. But it's a big effort to rewrite this big tutorial. And then probably we'll have the same problem again in a few years' time. So how you keep on top of it, I don't know. But certainly for just onboarding, I think having this one golden hardware with a golden tutorial, and we say follow this and you'll at least get somewhere, seems to have worked well.
Yeah, I think those are some pretty good points. I want to open up the floor for anybody either in chat to ask any questions, or if you want to come forward, you can feel free to just turn on your camera and chat a little bit. And then I'll just give a moment for anybody who wants to potentially hop in. And if there's nothing too much, I will just add on a point that I was sort of considering while Adam was talking about you create a book and then it becomes outdated because there's new technologies and new ideas. Within the Rust game dev, not that I've checked out all of the different books that are out right now, but I was reviewing one by the author of the RLTK, the roguelike toolkit. And I'm sort of interested in this idea that a lot of the technology that was used at that point might not be as actively maintained as some of the cooler, newer engines. And since the pace of everything is moving very quickly, it does become very difficult to lock down at a certain point. Or rather, if you're locking down at a 2-year-old version of Rust, then you could be potentially losing a lot of the more modern paradigms that are relative to or relevant to the particular field. And so it is interesting that in this game development textbook, as it's describing to how to make a roguelike, it does tell you to go into like your cargo.toml file and add dependencies at a locked version. But I think that the overarching principle is that, or it's still there, and it still shines through to be able to get you started with these ideas. And so, whereas in game development, it's cool to build a roguelike, or it's cool to build a 3D game with some engine in Rust, or then on the other hand, you have embedded in. You want to make your light turn on and off through the Wi-Fi, and that's your goal. You can definitely arrive there by these types of books, and getting started, getting introduced to the language through these means is only a way for like you to get your foot in the door. After that point, there's a lot more that you can do to branch out a lot further, I think. And so when it comes to maybe some of the smaller interest groups, cryptography and machine learning and other ones, I think there is a lot of potential for finding these cool questions that need answering. And finding what does Rust do significantly better than other like attempts at solving these problems. And so, yeah, when it comes to cryptography, maybe at the end of the day, what is needed is just crates that can do encrypt stuff really nice and quickly and efficiently. Or on the other hand, maybe it can be a really great way to learn some of these more primitive concepts about what is happening behind cryptography. And so, yeah, I think definitely as a lot of these groups grow and expand, a lot more of these cool use cases will come in. And I remember several years ago trying to figure out how to do some of my own cryptography in Rust and just some simple RSA stuff, and then running into some walls. And so, yeah, Tony, I see you turn your camera on if you want to add something to this.
I would just say I hope the landscape's like pretty good today if you're trying to use some of these standard algorithms. If not, let me know. At the same time, especially for a person like me, you know, I mostly work on the nuts and bolts, but at the same time, I'm constantly talking to people who are writing like crazy next generation cryptography. So that's like sometimes a difficult like gap to span in terms of like, you know, even though I'm writing the most boring of the boring stuff, like my personal interest is always in these like new cutting edge things. I know like one of the questions you had for us as panelists was kind of like, what are the blessed crates? And right now I'd actually say it's like a complete toss up, right? At this point, like there are like so many crates. So I would say as an interest group right now, we're not like blessing anything. Like I named Ring, but like sodium oxide is a good choice too. I personally work on a bunch of like pure Rust crates. So, you know, I think there's a lot of very cool stuff happening right now. And if there's any gaps you see in the Rust cryptography ecosystem, please let me know. I can probably point you at something.
Yeah. And I think this is a great point to close it off. And I do want to mention that one of the biggest parts that I've taken from this is just this being able to have this conversation with these other leaders and really seeing how much of a contrast there is between our separate interest and working groups. And so I'm definitely super happy to keep this type of communication going. And I think we were also discussing earlier that it might be cool to have collaboration in terms of a newsletter that really focuses on all of the interest groups sort of amalgamated together. Or sorry, not them putting together, but a newsletter that focuses on all the different sections that can give you an overview of these interest group ecosystems within Rust. So yeah, thank you so much to all of the panelists for taking the time. I've really appreciated all of the insights, and I'll hand it back over to you, Nico.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Forrest. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Adam, Tony, Ricky, Ernest, who dropped off. So that's kind of the end of our CTCFT today. The next meeting is going to be October 18th, and it's at the other time. You can click here if you like, 17 o'clock UTC. And for now, I'm going to hand off to Jane for the social hour, where we're going to make little breakout rooms. I'm not sure, Jane, if you have a set you want to make, but I'll make you host and we'll pick up from there. I guess we should take a short break, 5 minutes. Or
Yes,
something. I don't know.
I'm gonna make 3.
All right. Let me make you host. Okay. All set.
And just a reminder to stop the recording.
Oh yeah, that too. Thank you. Uh-oh. Let me reclaim host so that I have permission to stop the recording.